Hello and welcome to The Wire. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. History has become a contested field in recent years. After the BJP formed the government in Delhi and many states, it has imposed its own version of Indian history through school and university curricula and in many other ways. According to this version, for example, Rana Pratap did not lose in the Battle of Haldi Ghati. Simultaneously, many fake historians have emerged on social media, and large numbers of Indians get their history via WhatsApp and other sources. Our guest today, Dr. Ruchika Sharma, regularly comes across such fakes and shuts them down. She has an impressive array of credentials. She has two postgraduate degrees in medieval history and a PhD, all of them from Jawaharlal Nehru University. She used to teach at IP College, Delhi, and routinely goes for guest lectures in many universities. Her YouTube channel, Eyeshadow in Itihas, and her series History Clinic aim at busting popular myths about Indian history. However, what has brought her a lot of attention is the short videos on X or Twitter, where she takes on trolls and anyone who tries to promote bogus versions of Indian history. Dr. Ruchika Sharma, welcome to The Wire.
Thank you so much for having me, Siddharth.
Yeah. Ruchika, why is there such a proliferation of videos and WhatsApp forwards which give fake stories about Indian history? Why have they suddenly cropped up? Mainly, these are narratives that valorize Indian and Hindu, really, victories over Muslim invaders or talk about a glorious discovery, invention by an Indian much before the West discovered it. What lies at the root of all this?
I would think, three things, Siddharth. One, of course, is the fact that this all starts with the colonial history. When the colonial people come over here, they divide Indian history into three parts. One is called ancient, and the ancient period, according to the colonial historians, like James Mill, etc., coincided with the glorious Hindu period. The medieval period was considered to be the quote unquote Muslim period. And then the modernity, that is the modern period, was said to be brought by the British, in the form of the civilization that they brought onto the Indians. So this has sort of stuck in the popular history till date, wherein the idea that everything before 1200 AD is the Hindu history, and we need to therefore, create a glorious and a very long sort of Hindu history starting from the Harappan civilization, or maybe even extended further, and then not have this demarcation between the coming of the Aryans and the decline of the Harappan civilization. So we create this continuity all the way up till the Turks come in, which is then considered as almost sort of a dark age. The other reason why this happens is also because of a lot of political parties that benefit from a narrative like that. And fascinatingly, a lot of these parties also were birthed during the colonial time period as well. So you have the RSS, etc., who have this narrative that we will push forward the idea of a glorious Hindu past as opposed to a dark Muslim age. The third, of course, and I would, sort of take the responsibility, not just me, but almost I think all of history academia is responsible for it. There is clearly a void in popular history of wanting to know what really the idea of history was. And I think not a lot of academic historians are stepping up to fill that void, to write books, to make videos, to do podcasts, etc., where they could, make bite-sized, palatable history available, an good academic history available to the public at large. So I would say that it's a combination of all these three factors that such
So,
myths have come about and persist.
so these myths that are being put out by
Mhm.
using social media, especially, have filled that gap.
Yeah.
Are you saying that? But they have taken the Hindu part as the truth and the Muslim part as invasion. Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying?
Yeah.
Because it's
Because
and how do they treat the colonial past?
So a lot of the people actually, what is fascinating is when I sort of, because I keep doing this a lot on Twitter, etc., on X, etc. One of the common threads that I see is everybody who considers himself as a historian on X, especially from the right wing side, or those, who peddle this idea of all the invasion started from the Turk period and all the social evil started from the Turk period. They often will quote colonial sources and colonial sources only, because that is where this binary starts of the Hindu versus the Muslim, wherein the Hindu was the oppressed and the Muslim was the oppressor. And of course, in history, this would mean, the Hindu rulers and the Muslim rulers, etc. But of course, now the problem is a lot of this is happening in the present time. So people often tend to, put two plus two together and think that the people today, so for example, the Muslims today are responsible for whatever the Mughals did or whatever the Turks did. So the colonial period, therefore, is treated by these narratives with a sort of a dichotomy, wherein there is clearly a need to cite these sources because this kind of history is not found anywhere else. Thankfully, the kind of academic history which is done today in India is much better and has moved away from these colonial binaries, so that they can't use. The other, of course, is this idea of nationalism, the Hindutva nationalism, which was birthed during the colonial period as well. While a lot of it was thanks to the support of the colonial people, a lot of it is also anti-colonial. So they would, regularly whip out anti-colonial narratives to sort of stay on the safer side of the idea that, okay, we also hate the British. But, it sort of all falls apart when you see their only sources are actually British surveys, which offer very little interpretation and are, at the end of the day, very superficial, superficial meanderings into Indian history.
More often than not, many of these fake histories that go around are laughable, but sometimes they can be dangerous. I refer to the constant refrain that all mosques were built on Hindu temples by Muslim rulers. Babri Masjid has now become the Ram temple. What was Babri Masjid? Now there is a demand to restore the Gyan Bapi mosque to what it allegedly was, a temple. Can you explain this for us?
So I think, one of the biggest reasons as to why this idea, persists, that there is a massive communalization of medieval Indian history. I think is largely because of, again, the fact that not a lot of these myths are properly busted. So, for example, you would have ridiculous myths like 25,000 to 50,000 temples were demolished in the medieval period in Indian history, which is absolutely, anybody can see that it's a solidly exaggerated myth. But there are, people who would believe in this because this is the idea that's fed to them daily, through WhatsApp forwards and through other means, etc. um, I think something as simple as the fact that somebody like like a historian like Richard Eaton in his book Temple Desecration in Indo-Muslim States states that he has done, and he's done this very painstaking exercise of going into every primary source and coming up with the conclusion that only 80 temples were destroyed between 1192 and 1760 AD. So from 25,000 to 50,000, you have 80 temples, which is actually the ground reality. And all of these 80 temples were not destroyed by the Mughals, which is another problem. Everybody thinks that the entire medieval period is just the Mughals. There's no differentiation that there is a Sultanate period and then there is a Mughal period, which is another pet peeve of mine. It really vexes me as a historian to see that happening. But besides that, so I think that something as simple as that, if it could sort of get out in the popular media, if it could get out to the people, it completely busts this myth completely. The other idea, again, which I think more and more people should start recognizing, is that temple destruction was not something which is only happening in medieval India. You have probably the worst of temple destruction comes from Kashmir in the 11th century. This 11th, 12th century ruler called King Harsha. In Kalhan's Raj Tarangini, it is mentioned that King Harsha would regularly indulge in breaking temples and breaking temple idols. And what's fascinating is that he institutionalized it. to the extent that he appointed a special position called Dev Utpat Nayak, which literally means, the officer in charge of breaking idol temples. Temple idols. And that's his only job. The person who was given the job was Udayraj. So he is getting a salary from the state of Kashmir in 11th, 12th century by King Harsha, if and only if he's going to break as many temples as possible. And the description in Kalhan's Rashtarangini is horrific. They say that, these idols were, put in mud. They were thoroughly soiled and desecrated before they were broken into smaller pieces. And, this is a narrative which people barely know about. There
So it
is
was not only by the Mughals or Muslim rulers.
Certainly not. Certainly not. It's not just by the sultans. It's not just by the Mughals. It has a The idea of temple destruction goes even further, and even earlier than when the Turks come in. It's a common practice and was often done as a political tool to sort of get back at the ruler who's built that temple.
Ah, okay. And but there is also a history that shows that many Mughal and Muslim rulers, Tipu Sultan certainly gave generous grants to temples, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's not just Tipu Sultan. I think the villain of Indian history, so to speak, the person who's very notorious for it, Aurangzeb, actually gave many grants. He's given grants to Jain temples of Shatrunjay, Palitana, Girnar. He even had temples built. So there is a temple in Gopamau, Uttar Pradesh, called the Gopinath Temple, which was for Shiv. It's a Shiv, the Shivling is installed over there. And there is a inscription dated 1699 AD, which says that, under the reign of Aurangzeb, with his support, Noned Rai, who was the person who got this temple built, had this temple built and a tank next to it. Then there is another inscription that says that there is a Dauji Maharaj temple and a Nakkar Khana was built by Aurangzeb, and also a grant was given to the Dauji Maharaj temple. Then there is another temple called the Chitrakoot temple. And in fact, the Chitrakoot temple, which is in Allahabad, till date, it's a Balaji temple. Till date, will have, this farman of Aurangzeb, and it has been tested by the stalwarts of medieval Indian history. They've sort of looked at it and said it's original, like Irfan Habib, Athar Ali, etc. Have looked at it. And it, not only gives a very generous grant to, this Mahant, who was the Mahant of Chitrakoot at that point in time, but also is said to have made the temple, got the temple built. The legend goes that he had an officer called Ghairat Khan appointed so that the temple could be built properly. In fact, he's supposed to be the person Aurangzeb gives grant to Ram Rai, Guru Har Rai, who was a Sikh guru. His son was given, a grant in Dehradun, where the Gurudwara was. And then you have, many saints, religious saints getting grants, etc. So Ramjeevan Gosai is one such saint. You have the Jangam saints who are getting the Jangam Mutt and the Jangam saints who are getting a lot of these grants, etc. So Aurangzeb, if you look at this history, in fact, Jain writers are so impressed by him. There are writings upon writings written when Aurangzeb is alive and kick, not when he's dead. When he's alive, contemporary to him, there are many Jain writers who hail him as somebody who is not just, the word used is Mahabali and Mardano, which means somebody who's very overtly masculine and very powerful, but also somebody who allows for religious freedom. So it comes across as a very different picture of Aurangzeb. But sadly, starting from the colonial times, we've been given a very different idea of Aurangzeb as, just being a bigot who went on this absolutely whimsical temple destruction spree, which, needs to
But
be balanced out because it's there in history. We're not trying to do a balancing act. It's actually there in history that he gave all these grants. So I think this
but
also.
but but why would today's Hindutva elements, uh, who probably may have heard of this, if not actually read those books, etc., why would they? Why do you think they have made him the chief villain? Tipu Sultan is much reviled. Is it something a little more because it suits, and does it then uh, fit the narrative that they are trying to build, and which suits a lot of people who don't know anything about history to
Absolutely.
feel that yes, this was a villain and therefore his descendants have to pay for it. Why is that happening?
Absolutely. So I think again two reasons. One, of course, I'm going to go back to the colonial times. Both of these people, Tipu Sultan and Aurangzeb, were people who defeated the English. They're one of these rare kings who managed to actually, put a very brave fight. So with Aurangzeb, many people don't know he defeated Josiah Child. It's called the Child's War. In around the 1680s, it took place. And this was one of the biggest blows. So the English historians, have always sort of looked at Aurangzeb as the king who defeated them, and accordingly, sort of, given him this deeply brutal this deeply brutal narrative in Indian history. Tipu Sultan was exactly treated the same way because he also defeated the English, right? So it started with the colonial history, and these became the villains. And because in the popular history it has been left unchecked, it has, been going on. And now, of course, like I said, there are a lot of people who benefit from this narrative. So this is being fanned even more and more. Again, for both Aurangzeb being this brutal person as well as Tipu Sultan, you would largely see only colonial sources being cited. That Aurangzeb did this, that, and the other. Tipu Sultan did this, that, and the other, and he was horrible. So the idea, is basically to carry forward this colonial legacy of the binaries, and especially, typified by Aurangzeb. And like you said, the dangerous part of this is not just hating Aurangzeb, but to think that every Muslim today is responsible for what Aurangzeb did or what Tipu Sultan did, is actually, the real danger. And many people tend to actually think like that because there are parties who benefit from such a narrative, political actors who benefit from such a narrative.
I'm coming to now different. Clearly, as you said, there is something more to all this. It's no longer simply about mosques, temples, but it is using the past to benefit a personal, to push a certain current agenda, and 180 million Muslims, all responsible for the sins, apparent sins of two people or three people or something. It suits people. And it's a dangerous trend. In fact, a Buddhist scholar once, I can't remember his name, told me that if you really go down to it, many temples were built on Buddhist structures. So then where are you going to start?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
is that so?
Absolutely. There is probably, and I would, sort of argue this, although there isn't a lot of statistics, but just, sort of looking at it from a commonsensical perspective, if we think that only 80 temples were destroyed from 1192 to 1760, give or take, there is an even longer history before that of, these different sects fighting each other for patronage. So of course Buddhist sites, were destroyed brutally. We again, I'm going to go back to Kashmir. There is a 9th 10th century ruler who was the husband of this very famous Kashmiri queen called Didda, and the ruler was called Shemgupt. And Shemgupt, what he did in order to sort of take revenge on one of his damar, who was basically a feudal lord in Kashmir at that point in time, one of his damar was hiding in this very huge Buddhist monastery called Jayendra Vihar. This is all again in Kalhan's Rajtarangini. And Jayendra Vihar was burnt to a crisp just in order to get back to that Damar, and because the Damar was hiding in it. And he did not, Shemagup did not just stop at burning Jayendra Vihar. What he does next is even more fascinating. So he goes inside, he grabs the statue of Buddha and uses that as a foundation stone for the new temple that he built called Kshemagorishwar, which was a Shiv temple. So there is clearly an idea of destroying a Buddhist shrine and using its remains in building a new temple. Then you have, Tirumankai Alvar, who used, the stupa of Nagapattinam and the golden Buddha within it to melt that Buddha and gild the Ranganatha temple. We have this in this 13th century source called Divya Suri Charita, right? So properly, very, very well documented. So you have many such examples. There are
But
not Buddhist shrines, but even Jain shrines, who were subjected to this.
Ruchika, you speak in like a proper historian with research, etc. These things perhaps are of little value to those who are getting instant information. You want to give that entire instant information in, say, a few paragraphs on WhatsApp or YouTube video, which are getting more and more dangerous, I find. And then they'd rather go there and have this bite-sized bit of information rather than spend time thinking about this. Now I'm going to come to another one, which is a very popular one, which also you have written about and spoken about, is the so-called Aryan migration theory. I say so-called because from the point of view of the Hindu nationalists who swear by M.S. Golwalkar's book in 1939, We and Our Nation, who defined that the Aryans were an integral part here because that serves their purpose. And that's like a gospel as far as they are concerned.
Mm.
Now, time and again, historians have shown that it's wrong. Time
Yeah,
again and
absolutely.
again, it has been established that there was migration and the Dravidians were here. Why are they still persisting with why this fascination with Aryan?
So two things. One, of course, now we have a proper, solid hard science proof. We have genetic science backing this. So it's no longer a theory. I've dropped that word completely and I use it I just say Aryan migration because, that is what it is now. It's an established fact. There are two studies in Cell and Science, both of which are freely available. And, I would encourage people to read it. The study on Cell was done on a Harappan site and they found no Central Asian steppe pastoralist DNA in it, which means that the Harappans in that site did not have any contact with the Aryans. And then the study on science is done on the BMAC complex, which is where the Aryans settled for a bit. And there they have actually been able to date when the first wave of Aryan migrations happened, which is around 1500, 1600 BCE. And there they find steppe pastoralist DNA. Forget that. I would, in fact, actually encourage anybody who challenges this to get a DNA test, a genetic test done today, and they will find a percentage of their DNA having Central Asian genes. It could differ because it's up to 30%, but every Indian will have that. And that in itself is your biggest proof of Aryan migration, right? The other, of course, why this is not sort of accepted is because then it breaks this idea that invasions or the idea of outsiders comes from the Turks. So there is already this established idea in popular history, bad history as it's as it should be called, that all sorts of outside invasions starts from the Turks. They were outsiders and we were already here. This is therefore our land. But if you're going to say that the Aryans, the people who wrote the Vedas, were also coming from more or less the same lands where these people are coming from, then it just breaks that idea, right? So they want to hold on to this, and constantly battle this idea that there was no Aryan migration simply so that they can create, this myth that all invasions start from the Turco-Mongol period in Indian history. But even if you leave the Aryan migrations aside, I'm going to stop with that. What's fascinating is that even after the Aryans, there is a wave of migrations constantly happening. So you have the Kushans. So Kanishka is hailed as one of those great rulers. The Kushans come from the, Indo-China area, the Pamir Mountains, etc., which is not, included in the larger subcontinental idea of the subcontinent ever. So they are also outsiders. The Huns come over here. The Shakas come over here from outside. Almost all of, Indian history is about many rulers or, just traders coming from outside and settling over here and giving birth to, different cultural beliefs, etc., which, make actually India and its history a very diverse thing. So their whole idea is premised on creating that Mughal Sultanate period, and therefore the Muslims are outsiders, and we're the insiders. So if you say Aryan migration was outside, then that idea falls flat. So they're never going to sort of believe it, and that's the only word that I can use to explain, considering
Yeah,
now we
but
have
I
hard
do
schools.
realize, but there is this fascination with the term Aryan,
Mm,
because if you ask a common person at any stage, they'll say North Indians are Aryans, South Indians are Dravidians, and that is there is a fascination, and obviously the Dravidians are not seen as an equal status, while they may well have a far superior or equally good culture and language history, and Tamil is the oldest language. All that thing they'd like to demean so that they can posit themselves as, we have seen that in history, and we have seen the horrible consequences of that kind of building up that narrative about yourself, that Aryans are pure bloods and the rest are
yeah,
not.
yeah.
So I read somewhere there is a, I think he's an academic who does a regular show of his own and
Hmm.
interviews all kinds of so-called scholars. Where he, I don't know why I'm getting his mailers, but in one of the mailers recently he said, "I discussed the ongoing and historical persecution of Hindus over centuries with so and so." See the
Wow. Okay.
phraseology,
Mm,
ongoing and historical
mm.
persecution.
Persecution. Yeah.
So, why this victimhood? If you're 80% of this land, why this victimhood?
So I think I'm going to refer again to the colonial period, and I keep going back to the colonial period because you'll see a lot of myths, in popular history today, start from the colonial period only. So the way the colonial people looked at the Hindus and the Muslims, and they were the first to create this binary, was that the Muslims were these very brutal, clever, marauding race of people, and therefore they were considered as the powerful race, uh, to the extent that the British would want to hate them and fear them, but also want to emulate them. So, if you look at, for example, the British architecture, a lot of it was taken from the Mughal architecture. So, before this new parliament was built, if you looked at, the north-south block, etc., you would see, the very typical ways of very Fatehpuri-esque, and somebody who's sort of Fatehpur Sikri-esque, somebody who's read the entire debates of how New Delhi as a capital was formed, you will see that a lot of these people like Eber and Lutyens, etc., wanted to emulate Mughal architecture, and they, managed to do that. So there is a mix of awe and fear when it comes to these Muslim rulers. Now, when it comes to Hindus, there is this idea of them being hailed as quote unquote weak, and this is not my value judgment. Many colonial sources would say that they were weak, and they were also considered as allies. So for example, in the aftermath of the 1857 revolt in Delhi, for example, a lot of the Hindu merchants were heavily rewarded. So for example, shop spaces in the Fatehpuri Masjid in Delhi were sold off to this Hindu merchant called Chunamal, who was supposed to be a very good friend of the British. So there is this idea of them being weak and the Muslims being strong and powerful. And the British created this idea that this strong and powerful Muslim was constantly oppressing this weak Hindu. And, we're sort of going to help them, and we're going to be their allies, etc. This idea has transferred to popular history, wherein there is this idea that, because these were powerful people, they've managed to sort of persecute us. There is also this, almost as a reactionary counter to this, wherein people would say, no, no, we also had rulers who were against the Muslims and did not give up till their very last. So you would have Maharana Pratap and Prithviraj Chauhan and all of these, and stories surrounding it are heavily exaggerated of how powerful they were. um, there are textbooks now which are completely lying. So for example, the Rajasthan state board textbook says that the battle of Haldigati was not lost by Maharana Pratap at all. So complete creation of alt facts.
and
So there is
and popular culture, cinema, etc., has played up.
exactly as is happening, Prithviraj. And even there, what really shocked me in that movie is that in the 12th century scenario, Prithviraj is using the word Hindu as a religious term, which makes no sense at all, because that term in itself is a colonial invention, using as an umbrella term to define everything which is not Muslim and not Christian, right? So I would think that that is why this idea comes. It starts from the colonial period and it goes on, and this idea of persecution comes in. But then also this counter narrative that we have, some powerful rulers who were against it, and we're going to sort of take an inspiration from them and accordingly conduct ourselves.
So this is either very very clever, or it is you know, without any kind of research or history or something. So one of the two, and perhaps a big bit of both. That this, uh, Ruchika, you've been saying this on your. I went and saw your YouTube shows, and you've been saying it. Alas, I must confess that anyone who does not believe in what you say would probably shut their eyes and ears and put off the thing. But it would still reach somebody. Because my fear is that the younger generation is going to get these myths in their history books through various other means and get contaminated over the next generation, etc. But still, these kind of shows do make a difference. On Twitter, on X, you are constantly hitting back in the most funny way sometimes. Dodo is your favorite word. Uh, but these are. Do you get stronger troll reactions? I wanted to ask you because those
I
don't get
get
by us,
So I get stronger troll reactions, but I think that's what makes me stronger and my narrative stronger as well in many ways. So
including
yes, I use
threats.
this.
Including
Including
threats.
threats, yes. Including threats, which I think which is the probably the more worrisome part. And of course, a lot of the trolls often get personal, etc. Very recently, they infiltrated my public Instagram, took a few screenshots of my pictures, put it out there. So all of this idea of trying to because they cannot sort of battle me on my sources, because what I do is something that I have learned, very painstakingly, and also thanks to all the people who've taught me at JNU, etc. So, my research, therefore, is more or less impeccable, and they cannot sort of poke holes in it. So the next best thing to do is to discredit me as a person, to call me, as a liar, also to create this image of mine that I am a woman who has a life and who probably goes to a party and has fun and dances, and apparently that is not allowed anymore, and historians don't do that or whatever. So they will sort of create this idea, and so the idea with trolling, I use this word WhatsAppery a lot of the times, because whatever is served is actually not history. Whatever these people do on X, whatever they serve on WhatsApp, I call it WhatsAppery, and people who believe in it, feed on it, propagate it, I call them dodos. So the idea therefore is to create uh, uh, a difference between what they think is history and what is actual history. This is why I sort of constantly use the word WhatsAppery, and also to constantly call out this narrative as a narrative which is not based on any source at all. There is no academic source backing any of these narratives. Possibly colonial sources, but that, they themselves are not very academic sources, and you would actually need a proper historian to analyze those sources. So I think the trolling is can get as bad as it gets, but I think the trolling is also for me a very good feedback to know it really is reaching the audience that it needs to reach. That my videos are actually going to the people who have for ages been fed on WhatsApp. I would also think that for many people, these are long held beliefs. So trolling is a reflex reaction. Because when somebody sort of attacks your long held belief, you think that, oh, you automatically become defensive. And I'm hopeful that, not just me, but many other academics would sort of jump into this and put out academic history and accordingly, sort of reduce and tilt tilt the scales in favor of history and not really WhatsAppery, because right now WhatsAppery seems to be slightly more heavier. The idea is to break that. And I think trolling is a feedback that it's happening.
But my last question to ask you, because you already gave me that point, do you think that for the future, more historians should get onto the popular media, to social media, and talk about these things rather than stay in silos?
Absolutely. And I think it's not just because of how bad the state of popular history in India today is, but also because I personally think, and this is just my opinion, that all academics do have a responsibility towards the society of giving back to the society whatever they've sort of learned. So whether you're a scientist or whether you're a physicist or an astrophysicist or a historian, I would actually think that as an academic, it's your duty to inform the popular narratives of your particular subject with the kind of academic history or academic, science, etc., that you read on. So, not just as something which is the need of the hour, but also as a responsibility. And it's not just something that only historians are supposed to do. I would think students of history, postgraduate students of history who are learning, who are reading. So I started writing for a lot of these dailies like, Wire, Scroll, etc., when I was doing my MA, MPhil. Because, the more I learned, the more, inquisitive I got about the kind of myths that were surrounding me. So I would actually encourage, postgraduate students, etc., to also come. And, this generation, more than me, is, even more capable of doing things on social media, and they're much more savvy. So I would think they could make very good use of this medium, and put out the kind of academic history that really needs to be put out.
Okay, well, that sums it up. That more and more proper historians need to go out and battle what's happening. At the very least, put the correct facts across to people, so that it becomes some sort of more and more people get to read it, because clearly the younger generation needs this, and even older people. I mean, we make fun of uncles, etc., etc., but there may be
Yeah.
a lot of uncles who may have read proper history. So
Yeah.
it's not as if it's so in another binary. So thank you very much,
Thank you
Ruchika,
so much
Dr.
for having me.
Dr. Ruchika Sharma,
Thank you.
telling us that history is history only after it is researched, and popular myths
Absolutely.
circulated on WhatsApp, all designed to promote a particular agenda, is not history. So thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
It's WhatsAppery.
We'll be back soon with another guest. Till then, from me, Sidharth Bhatia, goodbye.